What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in. For today's video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at this mint condition, bone stock 1994 Toyota Supra Turbo. In this review, my goal is to teach you everything you ever wanted to know about the 4th generation Supra, show you what's unique about the turbo model, of course, taking on a thorough test drive, get plenty of sound clips and more. It's going to be a lot of fun. Before we begin, a huge thanks to my friends at Cosmo Motors of Hickory, North Carolina for providing this example today. For more information about the dealership, including contact info and current inventory, please feel free to check out their website in the description box below. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start her up and let her run. If you guys didn't already know, the Supra name actually came out in the late 70s as a variant of the Celica liftback. It was a pretty cool GT car that featured a longer wheelbase, wider stance, and more powerful 6-cylinder engine. It wasn't until the Mark III's introduction in 1986 that Toyota separated the Celica and the Supra into completely separate models. The Celica went towards front-wheel drive, while the Supra retained rear-wheel drive. However, it wasn't until the Mark IV's introduction that the Supra was solidified as a legend, mostly thanks to the iconic 2JZ family of inline sixes. The Mark IV Supra was produced between 1993 and 1998. In 1994, pricing started at $35,800, while the Turbo started at $42,800. Now that was a significant increase over a comparable Mark III, but the Mark IV was so much more car, with big departures in looks, performance, handling, and more. From the outside, you'll see that the Mark IV is sleeker, wider, and more streamlined, but it did retain similar proportions such as the long hood and short overhangs. There was no more pop-up headlamps or sharp edges. In fact, the Turbo had an impressive 0.32 drag coefficient. Circling back to the headlamps, they actually incorporate the low beams, high beams, and the fog lamps, which freed up the lower fascia for gaping air intakes. The two outer intakes serve to cool the front brakes. You'll find additional intakes just ahead of the rear wheels that not only cool the rear brakes, but the differential. Plus, you gotta love the tail lamps. They're comprised of 4 distinct elements per side. As a whole, the styling was super modern, kind of a timeless design that still looks really good today. Toyota also went to great lengths to drop a lot of weight from the Mark IV. In the process, this meant losing some of the features that you could get in the Mark III, like adjustable shock absorbers, but the end result was a 1-inch drop in the center of gravity. Aluminum was used throughout the body and chassis, such as the hood, roof, bumper supports, and the majority of the suspension. Also, instead of doing a traditional dual exhaust setup, they decided to go for a single exhaust because there was no change in performance and it saved 30 pounds. The Mark IV Supra's platform is actually a modified variant of the Lexus SC300. The wheelbase is 5.5 inches shorter, the suspension geometry is all unique, and there's specific coilover shock absorbers. Long story short, it created a car that was a lot more planted and more performance focused than its predecessor. The Supra's primary competitive set included the Nissan 300ZX, Mazda RX-7, and the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. However, considering the performance that it was capable of for the price, it was also compared to things like the Corvette ZR1, Porsche 911, and even the Acura NSX. All Mark IV Supras came with staggered wheels and tires. However, the Turbo setup, as expected, was a bit more aggressive. You had wider tires all the way around, wider rear wheels, and instead of the standard 16-inch wheels, Turbos came with 17s that could be had painted or polished. The wheels are 8 inches wide in front and 9.5 inches wide in the rear. As far as tires, you have 235/45s in front and 255/40s in the rear. These cars offered up a lot of grip. When they were being tested new back in the day, they were averaging like right under 1G of lateral acceleration, which is impressive today and really impressive back then, pretty much class leading. For stopping power, Supra Turbos had larger brakes, comprised of 12.6-inch rotors with 4 piston calipers in front and 2 piston calipers in the rear. Together they could bring the car to a stop from 60 miles an hour in about 120 feet. Also, the discs are internally ventilated. A Toyota first, they have spiral vents that allowed for more uniform airflow through the brakes to optimize cooling. In addition to that, a new 4-channel 4-sensor ABS system was added. It included a lateral G sensor that can modulate the pressure applied to one or both of the rear brakes. In other words, it can fine-tune the action of the brakes to increase control and effectiveness. The steering feels very direct and linear. It's a speed-sensing progressive power rack and pinion setup, which means the level of assistance depends on how fast you're going. The overall ratio is 17.5 to 1, it takes about 3 turns to lock, and the turning circle is measured at 35.4 feet. Underpinning the Supra is a 4-wheel aluminum-intensive independent double wishbone suspension with front and rear sway bars and fixed-rate dampers, leading to a firm ride that's not uncomfortable, but it does offer a lot of feedback from the road. It's agile and very predictable in its actions. The Mark IV Supra was powered by Toyota's 2JZ 3-liter inline 6-cylinder, an iconic engine that needs no introduction. This was a pretty big difference between the Mark III, which had the 2.5-liter 1JZ. Of course, both of them came standard naturally aspirated, but the ones that have lasted in people's memory for over 2 decades now are the twin-turbo variants. Unlike the parallel turbocharger configuration in the 1JZ, the 2JZ had sequential turbos. What this means is that the turbos spool up at different RPMs to yield smoother power delivery with minimal lag. The first turbo spools up at 2,500 RPM to provide good low-end grunt. The second turbo idles until about 4,500 RPM. At that point, both turbos start churning to provide maximum boost of 11.6 psi. This translates over to 320 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 315 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. Monumental gains over the base Supra. You can hit 60 miles an hour in as little as 4.6 seconds and top out at 160 miles per hour. This thing was in the upper echelon of sports cars of its day, and one of the quickest cars you can buy for the money. Across the lineup, there were 3 different transmissions available. In the base model, a 5-speed manual came standard, but the turbo got a 6-speed. A 4-speed automatic was optional. While most people would scoff at the idea of an automatic Supra Turbo, it actually had some pretty cool tech for the day that allowed the shift points to be altered based on your driving style. The 6-speed is pretty sweet. The throws are short and precise, the clutch pedal is nice and firm, and the positioning of everything is almost perfect. The only thing that took some time for me to get used to was that when you're shifting into 5th and 6th gears and even into reverse, the center console is tilted so much towards the driver that if you're not paying attention, you could hit your hand on the console. Controlling torque delivery out back is a torsion-type limited slip differential. This was exclusive to the turbo. It could split power equally between the wheels or to whichever wheel had the most traction. As far as fuel economy, the Supra came standard with an 18.5-gallon tank and required premium fuel. EPA mileage estimates ranged between 17 miles per gallon in the city and 23 miles per gallon on the highway. Expect an average of around 18 miles per gallon. The interior of the Mark IV Supra took driver focus to a new extreme. And while this car had obviously been very well cared for over the years, it's still an excellent example of just how well these cars were made in the first place. Looking at the interior and how well everything's been preserved, you'd probably be surprised to know that this car has just under 85,000 miles on it. Climbing in was like climbing into a time capsule. There was no abnormal creaks or rattles going down the road, all of the soft padded material across the doors and dash were still in fantastic shape, and the seats were so comfortable. I'm not 100% sure about later years, but at least in 1994, cloth upholstery was standard across the board, even for the turbo. If you wanted leather, you had to get the optional leather package, which not only added it for the seats, but the armrest as well. A leather-wrapped steering wheel and shift knob was standard. One downside of the Supra is that the interior is not all that practical. You don't have a whole lot of storage space between the passenger compartment and the trunk, but I'll talk about the latter a little bit more in just a moment. There's no cup holders across the center console, just a little storage tray, and you have a lockable glove box, but you don't have any door pockets. But none of that really matters when you have an interior that looks this cool, because from the driver's perspective, you really get a feel for just how dramatic the center console and the dashboard is tilted towards the driver. I love how simple and straightforward everything is, but I do wish Toyota had fitted some extra auxiliary gauges like they had in the Mark III. Oil pressure and boost pressure would have been sweet. There's still a bunch of standard features though, such as electronic automatic climate control, a digital clock, and a range of audio systems. You didn't have a telescoping steering wheel or the option of heated seats, which was kind of surprising for how much these cars cost brand new, but I guess if you wanted all the luxurious amenities, you could just step it on up to the SC300. The base audio system consisted of an in-dash cassette player and 6 speakers with a total of 120 watts. An optional 7-speaker system was available, which this one has. It came with a larger radio with an in-dash CD player and a subwoofer out back that put out 50 watts by itself. Swinging back to practicality, the back seat is really tight. I'm 5'10" and there's no way I could sit back there. I had no headroom or legroom. The only people that could probably sit back there are smaller children, otherwise it's best used for cargo space. I will say the sport roof was actually an optional feature for all Supras, at least until 1996 where Toyota made it a standard feature on turbos. Out back, open up the hatch and you'll find 10.1 cubic feet of cargo space behind the rear seat. That wing, if I didn't mention it already, was an optional feature for turbos only. The nice thing about that rear seat, like I said, is that you can fold it down to load up cargo all the way to the front. It's a relatively flat floor, and underneath you have a temporary spare tire. So now let's go ahead and see how she sounds. everyone, I hope you enjoyed the in-depth look at the 4th generation Toyota Supra. Be sure to stay tuned next time, leave a like below, and if you haven't already, subscribe. There's always a lot more where that came from. Take care, everyone.